Do you think the poet should be or is generally an advocator? Let me read here from a manuscript, one of your poems that you. This has not been published yet, right?
No, this is one. Yeah, this is actually a manuscript for the next book, which will come out sometime next year.
Let me read this. I think to a degree you are taking a stand here, and then I'd like to discuss that.
All right.
What verities are left for us, who counter public madness with a shrug and speak our minds in private, if at all? The times, we say, are really not in keeping with that fundamental love for something we can't quite describe, a faith kept more in spite of than because. The old, at last, accept each broken thread and move along the bridge across the dark, inhuman years. The young have yet to find a prophet in the wilderness between. They hear instead a very human voice disgrace our love, from breakfast to the last misgivings on the portable, and headlines flash disaster in our dreams. So if some quiet night, between the news of death and war and men who fall too suddenly beneath the waves, we cling exhausted to our mortal love, or sing outmoded songs to mythic men who stood before the tide, remember this: these shoulders are human and just so wide. It seems to me you are, if I can use the trite term, on a soapbox in a sense. You are advocating. You are.
Well, I've taken a step. I'm speaking from.
You're speaking for humanity. It seems to me. You're speaking for me.
Good.
You're giving me an excuse if I need one.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do need one. We do need an excuse. Not an excuse sometimes. This is a protest poem. This is a protest against. This is a protest against the state of affairs in a particular time. The poem was written after I had watched a newscast. Well, I believe this was before the assassination of King and Kennedy. But there were a number of newscasts of natural catastrophes and, but especially the social problems. Just again and again and again, you feel hit by them until you can barely breathe. And so then I take a stand, you know. I stand right there and I say, look, this is happening and I've had about enough of it. I understand there's a generation gap. I understand there's a credibility gap. I understand there's a truth gap. And so, but I can't, you know, I'm going to just turn it all off for a while because, again, I am a human being. I can take so much. I am not putting down my principles by any means. But there comes a point when you just have to say, that's it. And the world could, you know, just evaporate tonight because I'm going to bed and I'm going to get a good night's sleep. So this is a very human reaction. Yeah, I do take a stand there.
But in a sense, though, wouldn't that, doesn't that illustrate that some of the problems we're having, for example, with the word protest or protesters and people getting all excited, oh, he's a protester, or she's protesting. Doesn't this somewhat underscore a lack of total meaning of what that word means?
Yeah, it does. Of course, we have a tendency to abuse our words and to overuse them, so that today, for example, the word protest in the last year, I would say, the word protest has taken on a very negative connotation, precisely because you have to use the word, I suppose, when you're dealing with the student revolt and the racial conflicts and all of the other ills that seem to have settled down in the American society today. However, there is always the underlying. There are the underlying reactions to our experience, which it is the poet's privilege and damnation, in a sense, to know, because of course in realizing these he also suffers. More out of frustration, I think, than anything else. To be aware of a wrong, of an evil in your environment is one thing, but not to be able to see this fully and then not to be able to do anything about it, just simply because the problem is so huge in scope And you have to be realistic. I don't, I am really not in accord with the people who think that, oh, the problems will be solved and we shall go marching on to some sort of imagined glory, because this just isn't going to be the case. It's going to be a long, tough road. And my form of protest, I think, pertains to the underlying realities, which I think in most cases is a spiritual, it's a spiritual problem. I don't mean necessarily in any specific religious connotation, but rather the spirit of man, as opposed to the identity of man as expressed in his social institutions. So that my protest here is to the underlying spiritual malaise, or whatever it is that is ailing America, and so badly at this point.